in 15 minutes, we'll move on to you, Liz. And then 15 minutes after that, we'll do our panel discussion, and hopefully we start to get some numbers in. Right back. Yeah, I didn't vanish that time. Often I become invisible when I push back. Okay. This is from my latest release. Freedom's Law. Here, did that work? Freedom's Law, which is the sequel to Cloning Freedom. It is classic science fiction, far future. And basically the background is clones have no rights under the law. They are basically slaves. And they are used to create full VR5 plus emotion entertainments. And they think they're in the late 20th century, early 21st. And a clone has a do not assist order placed against her, which in the type of series they're using her to create is a death sentence. A retired space captain, war hero, determines that he cannot allow this to happen, and he's working as a technician on the show. So he liberates her and takes her out of United Earth Systems territory into the Republic Zone, where she is a person under the law. And the UES, humanity, Homo sapiens, are an unimportant member species of the Republic. And in the second book, they are on the switchboard station, which is the central transfer point for all Republic trade and commerce, politics, the whole 9 yards. And they are seeking out medical treatment for Rowan, who is the entertainment clone, because due to the way that they've tinkered her DNA, she's dying. But they can't go into United Earth Systems territory to get human medicine to cure her. And because species are very specific and have different biologies, they can't go anywhere else. So they've had to go to a black market physician. Ryan led Rowan, who wore a hospital gown, into Pikeman's treatment room. A being which looked like a bald flyzoid with human eyes and no tail clambered painfully off the examination table, then stared at Rowan. Wow, nice job. Did Pikeman do your Rowan look? You could be the fakie. Rowan tried not to stare at the being before her as she scrambled for an appropriate response. Did you hear she escaped the set region? Some crazy ex-space services guy kidnapped her. It was in the morning's information periodical. Really? Some crazy ex-space services captain liberated her, did he? Ryan's smile somehow made him look more predatory than the stranger's large canines. Yep, the periodical said he may be suffering from transfer dementia. I'm glad I don't play the market. SETE stocks have been in free fall since word got out. It's too bad. I'm a huge Angel Black fan. Rowan was my favorite. And despite that, you think it was good they used her as a slave? Snapped Rowan. Oh, Divine, you're one of those. It's not like she's real. I mean, medical clones, sure, they're people. They have memories, real childhoods, the whole thing. Emotional surrogates are made up. Like if you ever really met one, you'd know right away that they were fake. Oh, really? Rowan's voice was dangerously light. Walter, how often do I have to tell you not to bother my other patients? Pikeman stepped into the room with Timothy close behind. I'm sorry, Doctor. Walter's vaguely phalangoid face pulled into a parody of a human smile. Miss, whatever your politics and whatever you started as, the work is very convincing. With a hiss of pain, Walter hobbled out of the door. Give me a moment to sterilize the work platform. Pikeman pressed a button on the wall. A low hum filled the room as a beam of laser light swept back and forth over the examination table. As the equipment readies itself, why don't you show me what we were discussing, Dr. Chandler? Pikeman smiled ingratiatingly. Of course. If you set the fuel demand at 80% or higher in the manufacturing unit's tank, then reset the repair schedule sequence to maximize the use of downtime, you can increase nanobot yield per time unit by 20% without any drop-off in the construction unit's durability. All you need to do is take a minute of downtime to manufacture the new maintenance nanobots. I can download the schematic from my handheld for you, Doctor. Timothy adjusted several controls on a piece of equipment on the room's wall, then used a cable to interface his handheld with the unit's console. Excellent. Yes, I see. This new maintenance unit's design is brilliant. But won't it be problematic if it requires repair? Pikeman stared at a set of readouts on a screen. It's scheduled to become the standard in all human units in 6 months. It was the last thing I finished before the Nova Blasted University canned me. Timothy scowled. Small minds of petty bureaucrats. Fools. It is their loss. If the mouth-breathing students were such dullards that they couldn't keep up with your lessons, they shouldn't have been there in the first place. Pikeman patted Timothy's arm reassuringly. You two have hit it off, said Rowan. Your son is quite brilliant, Dr. Chandler. I hope you are suitably proud of him. Have you thought about my offer? Pikeman prepared a long, slender instrument. Rowan went red in the face. Yes, I'll give you the cell sample and do your tests, but I want more of the work done in exchange. Tell your toy to stay out of this, Pikeman glared at Ryan. Ryan shrugged. It's her life, and she's my ship's financial officer. Father, it isn't fair to expect everyone to believe the way you do. Dr. Pikeman shouldn't have to do business with a glare from Ryan silenced Timothy. Please, call me Blair. Pikeman smiled at Timothy. Tim. Timothy smiled back at Pikeman, then turned to his father. The point is, Dad, Blair has a right to deal with whom he wishes. We're the ones paying an exorbitant amount, I might add. He's the one supplying a service. He deals with me. Rowan's voice left no room for negotiation. Timothy looked at Pikeman, rolled his eyes, and shrugged. I will not pay more. Pikeman turned to Timothy. What I will do is exchange another 5,000 credits worth of service if you do an update and maintenance on my equipment. A man of your talents rarely crosses one's path. Tim, Ryan looked at his son. Timothy smiled. My pleasure. I'm interested in the way you've integrated alien equipment in the units anyway. Excellent. Now, Rowan, unless you have some other objection, get up on the table and stop wasting my time. I'll take a cell culture today and prepare the stem cells. I'll also clean up those cancers. I'll need you back tomorrow for the first round of stem cell insertions. Rowan passed Ryan her control jamming pendant and climbed onto the examination table. Roll over. Intestinal cells are best for getting the culture started. Rowan blushed and glanced at Timothy. Tim, would you mind? Asked Rowan. Timothy rolled his eyes. It's not as if I haven't done Farley's perspective. Rowan blushed crimson. Tim, there was menace in Ryan's voice. Fine, you really are delusional. You need help. Timothy left the room. You should listen to your son. He makes a lot of sense. Pikeman watched as Rowan rolled over, then inserted the probe. And That's my 10 minutes. Well, thank you. If there are any questions regarding Freedom's Law, please feel free. And you're more than welcome to unmute owner. Oh, thank you, Anita. Yeah, I rather like the Freedom Saga because it really riffs a lot on, you know, the slave trade in the United States, where for about a century, if a slave got into the northern states, they were technically free, but would be deported back into the southern states, and that went back and forth in their parliament several times. So Canada was the nexus of the Underground Railroad, the destination point, because the British were one of the first nations in the world. I think they were the third nation in the world to outlaw slavery. And I was able to play with a lot of those ideas and a lot of the way that I also wove in a lot of the stuff of how the vets were treated when they came back from Vietnam. And Ryan is actually what's called a medical clone, where because he took a massive dose of radiation in his first body during a major conflict, he had to be cloned and his memories transferred into the new body to save his life. And as it says in the write-up, you know, I think for Cloning Freedom, his career prospects died with his first body because there is a huge bias against all forms of clones. And it goes back to some roots in they call it the gene wars, where it turned out that there are humans genetically engineered individuals to help terraform Mars. And I kind of stole that from a cartoon. But the gene wars basically spun out when it turned out that even if you genetically change people, if you treat them like garbage, they're going to fight for their rights. And but it resulted in a whole bunch of bans in genetic technology and cloning that have dogged humanity ever since at a social level.
I'm curious about one thing.
Okay.
You've written a number of books that involved an imaginary sort of world. I'm wondering if you think your ability to imagine something different than what we live in expands over time, and it becomes somehow easier to get involved in. It's something that's completely different from what we experience.
Not really. Well, my imaginary worlds always start from a kernel of reality, and then I extrapolate what are the logical consequences. Like the Tinker's World series, which you see on my display, Tinker's Plague, Tinker's Sea. They are a projection of where we'll be in about 200 years' time if we don't do something to fix the mess we're making now. Initially, I was going to go 100 years into the future when fossil fuels really become a non-viable energy resource, if we don't do something to deal with that now. And when I crawled out from under my bed and stopped sucking my thumb, I decided to go another 100 years into the future so things were getting a little bit better. Because in about 100 years' time, fossil fuels would become non-viable as an energy resource based upon current predictions of how much there is and what's going on with the environment and so forth. And when that happens, we can expect between 90 and 95% of the human population of the world to die off in about a 5-year period. Primarily because of the resurgence of waterborne diseases, because we spent a huge amount of energy to clean our water. And Liz, it's your time slot, so take her away.
Okay. I'm going to be reading from my book that's coming out in the fall. It's called The Ground That Grows Roses. It is set in Hamilton. It's the second in the Singing Bones trilogy. So essentially it revolves around these sort of psychic people who can hear and sing to the dead, and the dead are rising because of environmental upheaval. So continuing on that theme of environmental upheaval, but mine's sort of like half apocalypse, like it hasn't gone quite as far as Stephen's. And so in this scene, I'm introducing, my main character is Denny, who is from the first book, and in this scene, I'm introducing Tessa, who's going to be kind of Denny's antagonist and counterpart throughout the rest of the series. I won't say what exact role she'll play, but here we go. So this is Tessa and her story that she has written. So the chapter is called The Ghost and the Troubadour. Tessa picked the dirt out from underneath her pinky nail, then scraped it along the groove in the desk again. Mrs. Grayval strode down the row toward her, a stack of papers in her arms. The fairy tale assignment. She could already tell by the way Miss Grayval was stealing furtive, excited glances at her that there was news. She had hit another one out of the park. Great. All the others she'd been happy to read in front of the class, ignoring the snickers from Sandy and the rest of the girls sleeping with the football team. What were they doing in writer's craft anyway? They were all about as deep as rain slick on pavement. This time, though, she dug deep. She might as well have written it in blood. Not that they'd get it, but she knew what it meant, and that was enough. So why had she handed it in? Because it was good. It was so good it deserved to be seen. It deserved to have a life, even if it just floated around a classroom for a few minutes, banging against the heads of a few morons. And, said the small part of her that still hoped, there was always the chance, slim as it was, that someone else in that room would be able to read her code, that they would come up to her afterward, lay their hand on her shoulder, and tell her they had heard the real story beneath the story. But they all spoke a different language. They spoke happy. She only spoke Tessa, and Tessa wasn't happy. Tessa was beautiful and haunting and surprising. Tessa was wise and complex and different, just not happy. Mrs. Grayval handed back her paper with a knowing smile. She had warm, dark eyes and beautiful thick eyelashes that made Tessa, with her washed-out blue eyes and thin Dutch blonde hair, wish she had a bit more substance. Then again, one didn't gain much substance on breakfasts of half-moldy bread and margarine. Tessa looked down at her paper. In Miss Grayval's loopy handwriting, she read, "Incredible work, Tessa, A+. Then further down, "May I present this to my adult education class on Thursday night? I think a lot of my students could learn from your example. See me after class," with a smiley face. She felt the blood rush to her cheek in spite of herself. Miss Grayval might not know all of it, but she'd felt something. Tessa had made her feel something. She just wondered now if it was the right thing. Miss Grayval had regained her usual position, perched primly at the front of the classroom, but her eyes had not left Tessa. "We've had some wonderful, wonderful work submitted for this assignment. Those of you who got A's should feel very proud of yourselves. I was especially moved by Tessa's story, and I think she should be first to share with the group today," she said, hand outstretched. Well, nothing for it now. Tessa pushed away from her desk, giving herself a moment to recover from her lightheadedness. People thought she was drunk a lot, but nope, just dead tired. Protecting your valuables from addicts makes you a light sleeper pretty quickly. She reached the front of the room, only now aware that she raised the paper up to read it, that she'd crumpled one side and sweated all over it already. Part of Mrs. Grayval's note had smeared. So much for mementos of success. "The Ghost and the Troubadour," she began. "Just so everyone can keep up," Ms. Grayval cut in, "a troubadour is a bard or wandering minstrel, a medieval musician." She nodded to Tessa to continue. Tessa stifled an eye roll. How did Mrs. Grayval put up with idiocy like this on a daily basis? Let them flounder in all the big words. Let them see how dumb they really were, and then maybe they'd really start learning. After a pause, she began in earnest. There once was a great lady who lived in a castle in a valley just beyond where the sun sets at night. She was a smart woman and beautiful, but no one ever saw her intelligence or beauty, for her husband kept her locked away in a room with no windows. Her husband was a cruel, greedy man, and the lady's goodness and wisdom only ever served to make him look foolish in front of his friends and servants. One night, the lord of the manor brought her out to a ball, forbidding her to speak upon pain of death, lest her sharp wit make him look weak in front of his vassals. The lord trod on her toes during the dance many times, but she held her tongue. He kicked her favorite hound hard enough to make it yelp, but still she remained silent. Then, at dinner, her husband's servant passed her a glass of wine. She could smell the drink was poison. Her husband commanded her to drink, and seeing her fate clearly for the first time, she stood in front of all his guests and said, "No, it's poison. You drink it." Her husband knocked the wine to the ground and mocked her before the guests. Then that very night, he walled her up in her clothes closet, and she was never seen alive again. Tessa trembled a little through her core and struggled to keep her hands steady so the others wouldn't notice. They saw your fear, they attacked. That's what had happened every time with Dad. He'd seen her fear and fed off it. A picture rose in her mind, not even from her own eyes, but from a distance, like she was floating above it all. She danced down the stairs in her mom's sweater, face covered with makeup in all the wrong places, singing some pop tune she'd heard off the radio at the top of her lungs and banging a pie plate. All the adults were in the basement. She hadn't understood why they always went down there and wouldn't come up for ages, why Courtney had to feed her leftovers from the fridge all the time, and why Courtney wouldn't let her go down there. She'd wanted to see them see how talented she was and be proud of her, like the parents on TV. If they wouldn't pay attention to her, then she'd do something to get their attention. And then they would clap and come upstairs and include them in the party. Maybe Mom would even make a roast or something. She'd gotten her show as far as the bottom of the stairs before Dad had emerged from behind the old yellow plaid couch, grabbed her by the arm, and hauled her up the stairs, bellowing at Courtney in a voice that still scared her. "Damn it, Courtney! You can't control one little kid. Nobody's ever going to want to marry you. Courtney, answer me!" She felt so scared then that her knees went weak, and it was even harder to keep up with him. Courtney had broken into the liquor cabinet and passed out drunk. That was how Tessa had gotten her golden opportunity. Courtney had never done anything bad before. Dad had been scary enough when she hadn't actually done anything. Dad had dragged Tessa up the stairs to her bedroom so hard that she skinned her knees on the carpeting. Once there, he'd opened her closet, thrown her into the darkness, and wedged the door shut. It had been pitch black in there, the only sensory input the feel of her good dress on her left cheek and the carpet under her fingers, which smelled vaguely musty. She took a breath, back in the here and now, and continued her story. Yes, the lady was never seen alive again, but her spirit remained in the castle, wandering the battlements in the evening and sitting alone at ghostly feasts in the dining hall in her decaying fineries, entertaining herself as best she could with no one to keep her company. She had forgotten the manner of her death and the location of her body, as is the way with ghosts. Her former husband drove the kingdom into debt and ruin with his stupidity. Then, after some drunken words with a neighboring lord, he entered into a foolish war, and the castle was destroyed. The land itself passed from hand to hand, but ultimately was abandoned as well. Still, people spoke in hushed tones over the dying embers of their fires, of the lady who dwelt in the ancient ruins of the valley beyond the sunset. One day, a bard entered the lady's domain, stopping to rest in the castle ruins. Once he had eaten and rolled out his bed, he made a small fire in the great hall's hearth and began to play his lute. He sang the country of his birth, a beautiful place on the seacoast near a great harbor, which had been torn apart by war. His patron, the king, had sent him to sing of the tiny kingdom's plight, to gather what aid he might. So far, he had found no one willing to help them, and so he had come to the lady's castle, for he was fond of his homeland and would do anything to help them, including invoking forbidden magic. As he played his lute, the lady emerged from the shadows, clad in the tatters of her finery, still as solid and real-looking as any living being. The bard continued to play, and she sat and listened. A tear ran down her ghostly cheek as he described the horrible things he had seen, the families torn apart, and the beautiful land defiled. Tessa pictured Lorien playing his guitar on stage whenever she read this scene over to herself, no matter how hard she tried to put it into a medieval setting. Something about the way his long hair spilled over his face while he played entranced her. His music was magical. It was all about Hamilton and her life, although maybe he didn't know it. What time are we at, Stephen? Steven, how are we at?
Yeah, sorry, had to unmute. You've got about 4 minutes and you'll still be in time.
Good, okay. Because I want to finish the fairy tale. Okay. Good. All right. Okay. The lady howled as only ghosts can, despairing at being trapped in the decaying castle forever. She wanted to help the bard, to do what she might to comfort him. The bard, sensing the source of her sorrow, said, "You are a ghost because you still have life and talent to give to the world. If I release you, you will be free to pursue your destiny. But beware, freedom comes at a terrible cost. There will come a day when the darkness inside you, the blackness of the pit that your murder planted and grew, will escape and you will have to battle it. Woe betide us if you should lose." "I don't care," said the lady. "Free me and I shall conquer even the stars in return." The bard nodded. He retuned his lute to a seldom used key and played a song, strange and dissonant, in another language that only ghosts understood. The song told the lady where her body was hidden and in what manner she died. As she remembered, flames of anger and hatred erupted around her, burning the invisible bonds which held her to the castle's ruins. She ran to the crumbling gate and stepped over the threshold. She was free, but with that freedom, she felt something rising up inside her, struggling to get out like a noxious worm in a cocoon. For the first time since her death, she felt afraid of what might happen. The lady and the bard set off together from the valley beyond the sunset to the far-off land beside the salt sea. The lady's days were full of wonder at the world that she had been denied in life, the wind through the trees, the feel of the grass under her feet, and the many travelers they met along the way, mostly kind common folk. None of them knew she was a ghost, although they wondered at her odd ways of speaking in tattered clothes. The lady basked in the sunshine as only ghosts can, letting the heat seep through her ethereal body. But even in the heat of day, the cocoon of darkness within her remained cold. Whenever she thought of her homeland, it would twitch and writhe, threatening to burst. She tried in vain to forget, but found that she could not. The two of them traveled on together through the wilderness to a vast, dry flatland with very few trees. Only one narrow road crossed this land, and the heat and light came overwhelming. It was there, far from any aid, that the lady collapsed, and the dark thing swelling within her broke open. Black tar spilled out of her body, onto the land, into the dry cracks in the earth. It flowed out of her until it was a vast lake 80 times her size, and out of it rose a spine. Then giant clawed arms wrenched their way out of the mud, and finally, a head which flung gobs of the dark stuff flat back into space as it broke free of its prison. It roared, and the lady screamed. She scrambled to her feet and clambered away through the muck, determined to run as far and as fast as she could, to leave this thing behind. But at the last moment, she remembered what the bard had said. There was a cost to her freedom, and if she refused to pay it, this thing would be set free into the world to consume and destroy as it saw fit. She stood up, faced the terrible monster that had been living within her, and ran toward it. Where they joined, there was a blinding flash of light. When the bard's eyes cleared, only the lady remained, but she was different than she had been. Her tattered clothes were gone, replaced by gleaming white armor. She smiled at him. "I now have the power to save your kingdom," she said. "Let us make haste to the land beside the salt sea." The lady and the bard reached the kingdom to find a small group of people, including women and children, who bravely held out against the invading forces. The lady took control of them, lent them heart, and strengthened them to repel the invaders. Some would say that she could not have done this, that she had no fighting experience. But she had experience fighting the greatest and most terrible enemy ever to walk the earth, herself. And she had won. No invading army could stand against the woman who had sought out and conquered the darkness living in her heart. After the war was over, the people tried to return to their farms and businesses, only to find them ruined beyond repair and with winter setting in. And so they began the long journey back to the valley beyond the sunset, where the lady had promised them shelter and land as long as they needed it. Once there, they were so entranced with the land's beauty that they vowed to stay there forever in safety and prosperity. As for the lady, she had fulfilled her potential and more, and so one morning she rose up and faded away into the light of the sun. They say that no one could look directly at the sun anymore beyond that day, for her power and radiance caused blindness to the foolish. And as for the bard, he continued to sing and show people the magic and potential hidden in all the world. You may have heard one of his songs, for it has been sung even here, far away from the valley beyond the sunset. The words go, "Fire burns and wind destroys. Dark clouds block the light of day. Back will turn and courage falter. Kingdoms die and fall away. For those that face their doom alone, For those that struggle in the storm, know your heart and they can't touch you. Fears once faced can hold no sway. Tessa looked up from her story at her classmates. A couple had gone to sleep. Two of the girls in the back were whispering and snickering. They'd reacted about the way she had expected. Looking back on it, she wasn't sure why she had thought this story would cause a riot or something. To them, it was just a story. And done.
Excellent work. Excellent work. Hi, Moira.
Good
So
morning.
do we have time for questions or are we going straight into the panel?
Well, since the attendance is low, I guess we can do about a 5-minute question and then move into the panel.
Sure.
I left lots of padding for the time. So I'm just curious, in the rest of the book, is the mother a piece of work as well?
Sorry, what?
I'm just curious, in the rest of the book, is the mother a piece of work as well? Like, you kind of showed the abusive father.
Oh yeah. So yeah, they both are kind of depicted. There's a lot of flashbacks, so they're both kind of depicted pretty unfavorably. But a lot of it focuses on Tessa's relationship with her sister Courtney, because in the next chapter, Courtney dies of an overdose, and Tessa pulls her soul into her to try to keep her around, and that causes infinite problems because Tessa
Okay.
can't forgive her. So yeah.
Interesting. Anybody else have some questions for Liz?
Sorry, I came in a little bit late, but for what I did hear, it sounds like a really great story.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And sort of the fairy tale does continue on through the background of the story. I'm leading a panel at When Words Collide that Stephen was talking about earlier about frame stories and kind of working different narratives into your story to kind of lend more punch to the main narrative. So yeah.
That sounds
Thank you.
great.
Oh, Moira, I will mention I am